rickdior, and today we're going to talk about the push-pull stroke. This is a right-hand technique or a left-hand technique, or both, that I demonstrated first in my relaxed hand technique video that most of you have probably seen. So we're going to go more into this today about how to use it on the drum set and how to develop it. I first saw this technique I first saw a drummer use this technique in the early 1980s. I was down in the village near NYU, and I saw Jaco Pastorius, the great bass player, playing at a club called The Bottom Line with a drummer named Kenwood Denard, and keyboard player Delmar Brown was playing with them, and they were playing this tune called The Chicken, which has a groove like this. So it's a very fast 16th note rhythm. And he was doing that motion with his right hand, and I was like, wow, that is beyond cool. I don't understand how he's doing that. And I actually went back and the next night and saw him again to try to figure out what he was doing. And I had heard Kenwood before playing with Pat Martino on a great record called Joyous Lake when I was a teenager, which I loved that record, but I'd never seen him live. So he was using this a lot on a lot of different kinds of grooves, and I had to learn it. I went home that night and just was like, man, I got to learn how to do this thing. So anyway, I tried to remember what was in my mind's eye. Remember, this is in the days before YouTube and any kind of internet, and so you had to kind of go out and see players and see what they were doing. Excuse me. And so what I did was I kind of broke down what I remembered, and I saw him doing drop strokes like that. And I just started working on it. So I'm going to go over here to the practice pad a little closer. You won't see my face, but I'll try to explain how I worked on this. First, before I start, I use a heavier stick to practice this, especially when I was learning. It helped with the rebound. This is a very heavy zebra wood stick that I made. You could use rosewood, anything heavy, not too thick, that's important. It needs to be around the same thickness as your drum set stick, but some sort of hardwood. South American hardwoods are much more dense than maple or even oak. So that would be the choice for learning this, a little bit of weight. So the first thing I did was drop the stick and just observe the natural rebound, and then I push it back with my fingers. So, because that's what I saw Kenwood doing, that sort of motion. There was no action coming from his shoulders or even forearms, just wrist. So I tried to duplicate that. Now this didn't happen overnight. It took a while, all right? So I devised several exercises to help me do this. The most important one being a combination of eighth notes into triplets into sixteenths. And that controlled the pulse of the rhythm. So this would be eighths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then the triplets, then sixteenths. Okay, and it doesn't matter if you start on the upstroke or the downstroke. In fact, you should be able to start on any stroke so you can play various groups of these sixteenths in any groove you're playing. It's also useful to do an exercise which is just 2 strokes at a time. As that gets faster, it almost develops into kind of a 16th note pattern. Now the beauty of this is that it's elastic. In other words, if you change the motion of your hand, you change the motion of your rhythm. So this is just straight eighths. Now if I change the squeeze point or the amount of time I'm pulling on the stick, I get into a triplet rhythm and anywhere in between. You can also change your throw. In other words, how far that stick goes down. So, as opposed to just a little bit. Okay? That's just a little, that's a lot. And obviously you get dynamic contrast, a louder sound when you have a farther throw. Okay? All right? So hopefully that helps you see how it works. Go back over here. Now, one thing I have had my students tell me who learn this is that sometimes their wrist will cramp up here at the top. That's almost normal. We're doing such a weird motion. What I suggest is just splaying your hands out before you start and stretching like that. That'll get those tendons stretched out. If it hurts, stop. Listen to your body, okay? Eventually, that'll go away. Once you build up your muscles strong enough to support it, you'll be fine. Now, you might say, how do I work on this? And why is this important? It's really important. Unlike some other drum set circus kind of tricks, you know, the one-handed roll, all that stuff, this is actually really useful for playing grooves and even a lot of contemporary music that uses polyrhythms. So in other words, let's say I wanted to do a really difficult polyrhythm, like 8 notes against 5 notes. So I'll set up my 8-note pattern here. So that was 5 notes in my left hand and 8 notes in my right hand. That's really hard to do if you're just doing this. Okay? Because again, this is one motion. So I've actually used this with the symphony orchestra I play with and some other contemporary pieces, percussion ensemble pieces that I've written. That kind of technique is really great, and it makes it very easy to play any polyrhythm. You could even try things, this is more difficult, but try things where you're playing straight with this hand and slowing down and speeding up with your left hand. Which is really cool for playing solos and playing jazz and stuff like that. All right, so it's super useful. The other reason it's useful is for playing grooves. I just talked about it being elastic. That goes a long way to playing grooves that have a little more, funk in them. In other words, if you want your right hand to have that kind of meters, the group the meters kind of laid back thing, while the rest of the kit is doing a little more of ahead of the beat. So. All right, so that's something you can use in second live rhythm. Anywhere where you don't want the right hand to be stiff, all right? You can obviously also use it for grooves that are straighter. So that's important too, because if you were doing this, wouldn't be able to play that cross strum click. So if you can play that fast with one hand, you can do that cross strum, which is really common for pop music, for country music, for Latin music, everything. The other really useful genre for this is playing samba. So in other words, I can pretty much copy the sound of a pandeiro, which is a Brazilian tambourine, with my right hand. And again, do those polyrhythms, which the little tambourine the little Brazilian drum might play, okay? So lots of really, really useful kinds of rhythms for this. Now you might say, well, how the heck do I work on this on the drum set? It's pretty basic. Actually, if you've watched any of my other videos, you've seen that I work on most every type of coordination exercise the same way. I use my book with rhythms. Any rhythmic book will work. Syncopation, Ted Reed's Syncopation, Gary Chester's New Breed, any book with rhythms. So in my book, page 7, 8, 9, and then in the back I got a lot of rhythms, and I use those. So I might set up just a samba groove like I just did. So. Okay? So those are the one-note rhythms, and you might want to go to the two-note rhythms, and then also try to use your snare drum. That changes things up a little bit coordination-wise. All right, and then, so what I'm doing there before I get too much into it is I would start on the hi-hat, introduce that, but don't play much with the foot. And then I'll move over to the ride cymbal and start experimenting with my past ostinatos. One that I've done a lot, you guys probably know of this one. And then get the right hand going. So all that kind of coordination technique is really, really useful for you to do. The only other thing I'd recommend practicing, and this is very difficult, is hand-foot stuff. So in other words, you could take all the quarter notes, and then all the 16ths, play the quarter notes with your left hand, and the 16ths or the 8ths with your foot, and vice versa. You can also divide things up. So like page 8 of my book would sound like this. Just doing on the hi-hat. Well, we'll do it on the ride cymbals. All right, so that's page 8. I'm playing every other note, snare drum, bass drum, snare drum, bass drum, like that. Any kind of rhythm will work. That's really important. For some reason, adding your bass drum on anything other than an ostinato is very difficult while playing this. Don't ask me why. Someone should do their dissertation on it, but it's a coordination problem. So always make sure you're working on exercises like that. So that's it for this. Please keep sending me your questions and requests, and hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.